Tell me a little bit about your experience with being on the documentary The Daily Wire, because I was surprised to see you there specifically because maybe this is just because I'm desperate to have our voice represented in the culture. But even though the vast majority of the guys at the Daily Wire are Christians, it was still good and refreshing to see a thoughtful Christian voice, philosopher, theologian represented in a film like that. So I guess I'm just kind of curious, and then I'll dovetail with another question that's relevant to it. But how did you get in contact with those guys, and what was it like filming the documentary?
Well, the book across the path of Ben Shapiro and Matt Walsh sometime in the first 6 to 8 months of it being published, and I was aware they'd tweeted about it. Ben
Yeah.
had me on one of his podcasts, so they were aware of the book. And then I think it was last October time I got an email from the director of what was to become the movie, What Is a Woman, asking if I'd be willing to go down to their headquarters and be filmed, uh, interviewed about the trans issue, really to try to set the whole thing in historical context. And
Hmm.
I teach at Grove City College, so I probably teach at one of the few institutions, and I have one of the few jobs in the United States of America where being involved in that documentary might not actually completely destroy my career.
Yeah, I was wondering
So
about that.
I I took the yeah, I'll do that. That'll be fun. And I mean, I can't go into all the details; it would take too long. But it's the only day in my life when I had my own personal ex-Navy SEAL armed bodyguard for
There we
the
go.
day.
Yeah, that's
So
what
it
happens
was
when you
it was
dig
a
into
it
that
was a
topic.
great experience. Oh yeah, it was an interesting day's exposure to some of the scarier side of identity politics.
For sure. Well, like I said, I'm glad you were there. And it kind of sews into maybe a very broad kind of conversation about the book. But you'll have to forgive me. I was listening this morning in preparation to prepare for our conversation today. I was listening to a conversation you had with Colin Hansen of the Gospel Coalition. And it was very interesting just to hear the conversation about the book and what you guys were discussing. But I was also, it piqued my interest to hear kind of the background that you guys kind of glossed over with your own personal relationship with him, but then also to kind of what you guys had to say about culture war. And I found that really striking because I think one of the things that I'm consistently trying to discover, unearth, investigate is what is the Christian response to what's going on
Yeah.
in the world. And I think it's fair to say that you and Colin expressed some trepidation, if not criticism, of culture war and the way in which Christians are kind of handling that. And in some ways, I totally get that. But then I also reflected upon what the Daily Wire is doing in light of that documentary and how much of an impact it's having and how widespread it's becoming, almost to even call it a movement. And I thought about the documentary, but then also to the response of the Daily Wire, who I think it's fair to say is inculcating the culture with conservative ethics and values. And I think about, well, what's the Christian response there? Isn't there some way in which we as Christians are supposed to do the same thing? And how do we respond to what's going on in culture right now? Now, I realize that so much of what's going on in culture sure seems at the foreground to be a critique of Christianity. I think it was alluded to in that conversation with Colin that perhaps that the reason the West or America specifically is post-Christian is because maybe we've lost that battle. And I want to throw something your way and just kind of hear what you have to say about that. I think perhaps that the reason the culture is post-Christian is not necessarily because we've engaged in the culture war and lost, but perhaps because we did not provide soul-satisfying answers to the biggest questions of our age. I think by and large, what we did is we produced the megachurch as a response to some of the biggest questions of our day, which would be human sexuality, meaning, existence, race. You know, how do we have a biblical, redeemed perspective on these things? And I think by and large, I don't know that the church really gave soul-satisfying answers in my generation, which would be millennial, and then I think it's fair to say your generation too, which would be Gen X. I don't know that we really did a sufficient job of engaging in those cultural ideas, and I think, maybe anecdotally based upon experience, I view the rejection of Christianity in the culture largely because we didn't engage like we should have. Now, whether that looks like what we're doing today or not, I think is a big question that maybe for another podcast. But if we look at the culture war just simply as this, not otherizing or not treating the other as enemy, but rather a battle for ideas or fighting bad ideas with good ideas, and from a Christian perspective, fighting bad ideas with redeemed ideas. I look at your book and I think to myself, boy, this is a great tool in the toolbox in order to be able to do that. So I'm curious about what you think the role of your book is in the kind of greater auspices of the culture war, or if there is a critique that you have about that. What is it, and how does your book fit into something that doesn't coincide with the culture war?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of comments there. First of all, generally in culture war, I think that the Bible itself uses martial language. So
Yeah,
the idea that we're in a war is not in and of itself a bad thing. Really, when we talk about culture war, often we're talking about strategy and tactics rather than the bigger phenomenon. There's no doubt in my mind that the world is a spiritual battleground. The Bible
yeah,
makes that very clear. Uh, Second thing is I think that you're right in what you say about how we've lost ground. I'd put it this way. I think that for many years, for many generations, the basic moral framework or instincts of Western society tracked pretty closely to the moral instincts of Christianity.
right,
So homosexuality was regarded as wrong. It may have been regarded as wrong for the wrong reasons,
right,
but the basic moral code of the West tracked with the basic Christian ethical code, and the reasons for that, the Christian origins of the Western ethical code. I think what that did was it made us lazy
mm,
because if you don't have to think out and argue and justify a position in the public square,
you
then you
don't,
don't you
yeah,
don't do it, and you grow lazy. And I think particularly Protestantism grew very lazy in terms of thinking about these big questions. So I think you're right that Protestantism in particular has been caught terribly short by what's happened in our culture, the sudden flipping in our culture to a very antithetical kind of morality from a
hmm,
Christian perspective. Where does my book fit into this? Well, in part, there are various ways I could think of it. One, it's an attempt to appropriate some of the best of Catholic thinking on this for our current situation, because Catholics, with their natural law tradition
yeah,
and their strong tradition of social teaching, agree or disagree with it, they've got it. They have a resource to draw on. And I think that one thing that Protestants, I'm grateful now to Catholicism for, is there's certain resources there we're able to draw on.
yeah, I agree.
Secondly, I think that you know, I'd want to distinguish the culture war. So the culture war takes place on at least two levels.
Hmm,
On one level, there's the battle for policy within and institutions within the broader culture. And that's fought through the ballot box. It's fought in DC. It's fought in all of the usual political ways. Uh, but there's also, I think, a battle for the minds that's taking place
yeah,
at an individual and personal level in the classroom, for example, where I teach. And my approach there is I need to be persuasive. If I'm standing on a political platform, I need to make a good case for my political platform. I need to win votes. If I'm in the classroom, I'm not winning votes.
hmm,
What I need to do is persuade students who are maybe sitting on the fence on key issues that the traditional Christian position is a reasonable one to hold, and it can be held by people who don't knee jerk hate their neighbors and who don't engage in caricaturing their opponents. So
right,
what I try to do in the book is offer an approach to issues of sexuality, which are among some of the most hot button issues in our culture, where, at least from my perspective, I say if I've got a gay student in class, I'm not going to feel embarrassed about saying to them, read that chapter in my book. They're not going to feel that they were uh,
mm,
talked about hatefully. They're not going to feel that they were despised. They're not going to feel that their viewpoint or their arguments were belittled or treated lightly. I want the book to be a model of engagement with the big ideas of the day in a way that avoids the kind of slanging match and soundbite engagement, that avoids refusing to acknowledge the good faith of anybody who disagrees with me,
Hmm.
that so characterizes much of the public debate on both sides.
So you just got done watching a small excerpt of a much larger episode. You can find the link to that full episode down below in the description of this video. So you definitely need to check that out, because if you like that clip, you'll like the much larger episode. And while you're at it, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and click that little bell to be notified when great new episodes of Indie Thinker come your way. Thanks for watching.